Holly Smith. Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time, and very excited to have a chat with you today. And we're going to cover off why you decided to bet your career on Databricks. Hopefully it was a calculated gamble. But yeah, it'd be great to sort of start off, Holly. I always like to understand a little bit more about my guests, like where they came from and kind of what their background is, if that's okay.
Okay, so hello everyone. It is wonderful to be here with you. It's nice to be able to talk about kind of the career side of Databricks. Normally I'm spending a lot of time talking about the platform, and I think sometimes we do forget a little bit about the person side. And a lot of what I'm doing at the moment, I recognize that I am encouraging people to use a platform that ultimately, there's only so many platforms that people can use in their day jobs. And for some people, they might start using Databricks for the first time based on something that I've said. So maybe it's worth going through why I bet my career on Databricks those many, many years ago, and why I still think it's a fairly safe bet, definitely safer, a lot safer than it was from maybe kind of like 5 years ago. So a little bit about me. My name's Holly Smith. I'm currently a staff developer advocate at Databricks, but I joined about 5.5 years ago. So I was interviewing back in kind of like 2018 time. And back in the day, it was basically managed Spark with a few extra bells and whistles. Like Databricks at the time, I want to say it was a diamond in the rough. Like it was a diamond still in the ground, frankly. And maybe some context about why I decided that Databricks was the thing to me. So I'm not going to name names, but obviously if you go to my LinkedIn, you can see who I used to work for. And I worked for a company that was maybe 10 years behind technologically wise. And there was much fanfare around this new project that was going on, where we were suddenly going to upgrade and be only 5 years behind what the kind of standard of technology was. And I thought, how can I ever deliver anything meaningful? Like I had a lot of work that I wanted to do. I was lead data scientist at the time for said company. And I was like, how can I ever get anything done with all these technology blockers? Like I had some really smart employees, a lot smarter than I was, not that hard, but really wonderful employees, and just trying to get anything into production was a nightmare. And I was like, you know what? I've had enough. Like I'm not doing it anymore. And then the stars kind of aligned in terms of, finding people and like looking for new opportunities. Databricks wasn't the only thing on the table. But as part of my interview, I demanded a demo, and they kind of looked at me a bit like, sorry, what? I think also for context, it was, back in 2018, we were maybe like 30 people in a WeWork in the London office. Like it was tiny. I think we'd only really been there for like a year or so at that point. And so I knew that this was going to be a gamble, and I knew that at that point it was still a startup. We'd just about done the Series D raise at that point. So still trying to figure out that product market fit, those sales deals were very small at that point. There was definitely a lot more risk than there was now, but literally just from seeing the product and seeing what it could do in terms of bringing together your data scientists, bringing together your data engineers, and being able to deploy all in one platform. For me, this was one of the big things that made me think, yes, this is what people are crying out for. These are the kinds of things that need to be, easy to do. Instead of focusing on, sticking all the boxes together, you want to focus on making better models or like having better data quality, like the things that really make an impact, rather than having to fight with some data center about how many boxes you need and like whether that's going to stay consistent for the next 6 months. Like I have no idea. Like why I just have to spend months talking about this. That's kind of how I got into it. It's probably worth saying as well, I've had a few roles whilst at Databricks. I joined as what was then a customer success engineer, but it is now known as a delivery solutions architect. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what the acronym is. And ultimately, there's kind of like technical post-sales. So the deal has been done. People are like, yes, Databricks, I'm gonna buy it. And your job is to make them successful. Not necessarily through you hands-on doing the work, but a lot more of like, okay, then if you trained people, do you know what project go first? All of those kinds of things. So a lot of like, what features do you want and all of that kind of stuff. I'll be honest, that was a lot of meetings to go to more meetings, to take actions, to set up more meetings. It wasn't quite the role for me. So I ended up...
Because I'm guessing you were quite technical before then, right? You were very hands-on in the role prior?
So that lead data scientist role was a lot of leading and not a lot of data science.
Okay.
So it was... So I kind of earned my stripes doing what was then statistical modeling, kind of data science before it was cool. So I knew the concepts, I knew kind of how it worked, but I wasn't personally the one doing the development. That was the team. It just needed someone there to be able to articulate, to be like, no, we can't tell you how effective the model is going to be before we've even started, before we've even looked at your data, and kind of a lot of like management wrangling. So that was the kind of experience I had. And then moving to something that was cloud-based, which is a little bit above my level in terms of the kind of technical understanding. Now, thankfully, Databricks has got a fantastic bootcamp. So when you join, everyone goes on bootcamp and you all learn a lot in a week. It's by no means the end of your learning journey, but boy, does it kickstart it. And from there, yeah, it was, it's still kind of technical conversation, but not necessarily like, oh, can you help me debug this code? So from there, I then wanted to do more hands-on work. And so I got my Spark certifications and I went into the consulting business. Now, people might not realize that Databricks does have a consulting partner, like a consulting business, even though we have so many partners. And our model is not quite like a Accenture where we're like trying to bill as much work as possible. It's literally like, this one project needs to be successful. Holly, go make it successful. And you're like, oh, okay, then fine. We tend to be quite second line. We tend to be like the de-riskers of projects. So if you have something that has to go right first time, you might come to us rather than taking a chance with, other partners. That's not to say that they're not capable, but you can definitely hold us kind of feet closer to the fire, shall we say?
Sure. And is that the professional services arm?
Yeah, that's professional services.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And do you typically deal with like the tier one customers, or does it range from different levels of what's the right word? It's spend. Do they have to spend a certain amount to get professional services? No, not really. I mean, in terms of the mechanics of it, is someone super small who are, only going to spend $30,000 a year with Databricks, then going to spend double that on like my time? No. Sure.
Probably not.
Yeah.
There's loads of kind of mechanics that we do with the deals to kind of, I'll get PS, we'll offer you a discount. That's not necessarily something that always happens. So please don't go back to your sales rep and say, holy sad. There are things like that kind of go on, which is very common. And then sometimes people just kind of pay outright because they, especially kind of like second and third year, like they're like, oh, well, we worked with Holly on the first year. We definitely want more of her time. Can we just like book out her time for the next year or so? Okay. So yeah, it's projects that kind of have to go right. This might be where they've tried to do it themselves before and it's not quite gone to plan. Or this is very new to them and their CEO is kind of breathing down their neck and saying, you said you had a bunch of data problems. Now you bought Databricks. You said it was going to fix it. We spent a bunch of money. Where are the benefits? And so that's where someone like me might be coming to be like, okay, the 6 month delivery, we can do it in 3 months. Let's go. And so I kind of rose through the ranks there. I started off as a consultant, then to senior architect, and then senior architect, kind of progressing through that. And that's just kind of bigger and bigger picture stuff that you're working on. So and now I've moved to developer relations, where actually I spend a lot more time talking about it than I do actually doing it, which I am really enjoying, but it's kind of an odd job. So I'm not necessarily going to speak about it too much today. Sure. But definitely in terms of the platform itself and why I enjoy working with it and why I've stayed with Databricks, they're definitely going to be represented by the time that I spent being like really hands-on with the product.
Yeah, very nice. And obviously you mentioned earlier that you joined in 2018. I've been in recruitment for about 12, 13 years, pretty much solely focused on the data markets. But I only started really noticing Databricks in about 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I picked up a customer who they were a consultancy themselves, and that was their chosen technology to sort of implement into their clients. So yeah, for me, I only came across it in 2019. When did you first hear about Databricks, and like what was it that drew you to them initially?
To be honest, until someone from the company had reached out to me, that was the first time that I'd heard of them.
Okay. So similar, 2018-ish, was it?
Yeah, so 2018 I was interviewing, and then like very start of 2019 I joined. Again, I was very much, because I was lead data scientist, I had a lot of people who were, like telling me about their product. And a lot of the time it'd just be like, please go away, shut up. Like you're telling me on something that like isn't a problem that I have right now. Please go away. So I had a lot of like what I didn't want to go to. And then when I read about Databricks, I was like, oh no, I could see in my mind's eye like how this would be useful for so many different people in different industries.
And do you remember those like early interview processes? Like what did you have to do to, be successful? Can you remember the sort of structure of their interviews and what they were focusing on at the time?
Oh, goodness me. For the role that I joined as, it was a lot more, how can you handle ambiguity? How can you manage kind of conflicting priorities? There was a bit of technical stuff, kind of like SQL stuff, blah, blah, blah. But for that kind of, post-sales role was a lot more kind of like technical organization rather than the actual doing. Since, however, have interviewed a lot of people to work in our professional services organization. I think that's probably a lot more useful for people watching. So if you are thinking of, hey, I want to get into Databricks and I want to, maybe I'm going to have to interview and they're going to have to show my Databricks skills, this is what the interview process might look like. So generally, it's kind of a first chat about, what is your experience using Databricks? There's normally a technical architecture interview where we will, I'm not sure if you've ever used Excalidraw, but it's just like a really easy drawing tool. And it's like, okay, here's the URL, draw me a diagram. What does a lakehouse look like? What are the things that you need to consider? And then you start kind of poking and probing and being like, okay, this is a great batch architecture diagram. How would I turn it into streaming? What are the considerations I would need to use? Okay, then actually, maybe instead of having a load of tenured Spark developers, actually, I've got a load of people who are using the platform for the first time. How would you simplify this? I have a security conscious customer. How would I change this architecture to work with them in a more kind of security focused way? Now, that is a very kind of architecture level. So if you're looking for a kind of senior role, that's probably the kind of questions that you're going to be thrown. However, if you are not at that level yet, no worries. There are things around kind of coding. Some companies offer coding exams. It can be a little bit difficult with the Databricks platform itself because like spinning up an environment to do the coding can like be a bit tricky. So you might have some kind of coding examples to do. But generally it might just be kind of like syntax or, how does a Spark cluster work? Or, why might this scenario not work? And being able to go through not just the, Spark.read syntax, but also the kind of theory underneath of like, why is this a good idea? Maybe why is this not so much of a good idea? On top of that, you also might get questions about just like technical project management. So for example, the customer's asked you to do something that's completely impossible. How do you solve this problem? How do you go about dealing with it? Or you've got an escalation, or you accidentally did something wrong. How do you go about that kind of like the people side of it? And I do often see a lot of candidates who are like, technically they are great, but it gets to the point of, tell me about the last project you had that went wrong. And a lot of people have got like quite, simple examples. But the great news, if you're listening to this and you've got a hellish project at the moment, great news. This is going to be an excellent interview story one day. But being able to kind of demonstrate that, yeah, I had this stakeholder who changed the requirements every 5 minutes. Like, great, this is going to be an excellent story to tell, because you can't have no matter how great the technology is, you can't have a successful project if you're constantly dealing with some scope creep. So there's those two kind of elements to it. Like there's the technical side, but then also the like make sure you deliver the right thing kind of side of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's really good advice. Yeah, and I think it'll be very helpful for those aspiring bricksters, who are looking to make the move at some point. Also, as well, Holly, just on that, and I appreciate this isn't all about how to get a job with Databricks, but from your perspective, what would you say makes the sort of complete, rounded, engineer? Like, what kind of skill sets, would you think they would need to have, need to learn, need to develop to become, very proficient on the platform?
So I'd say this is a lot more generic rather than like Databricks, like employee specific. But anyone who is a user of Databricks knows that the platform moves so quickly. Honestly, like even kind of like 6 months between, when you start a project and then when you end a project, there's probably a few new features in there that you're like, wish I had that earlier. And this is kind of a curse, but it's also a benefit. And that is, for me, like the best Databricks developer is someone who can learn on the fly, who can figure things out as they go. So, it's one thing to kind of learn everything by rote. It's another, you're never going to have a project where you start and you don't know what a thing does and then you go into panic mode. Like that's not really the outlook that you need to be able to work with Databricks. And I did notice this with kind of very junior people that I'd work with versus the more senior ones. Like a new feature would come out and the junior people would be like, oh, I need time to investigate. Oh, I don't know anything. Oh my goodness, like what am I going to do? And whereas the senior people very much, very open, they'd be like, hey, Holly, how does this thing work with this other blah, blah? And you'd be like, yeah, I don't know. Let's have a think about what it's going to look like. Let's have a think about what it needs to do. What does it look like if it's doing a good job? And then we make a decision on whether to use it. And I think that kind of openness and like how to interrogate something new, how to pick up something that's new, just being able to quickly know how to kind of play around with a new feature in a like safe and sensible way to be able to test the limits of what it does and what it doesn't do, and then whether that's the right fit for your project. So there's definitely a piece in there about kind of continuous learning. You didn't ask this, but I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent. I think there are some people out there that are like, I will do a boot camp and then I will know everything about Databricks and then I will get the Databricks job. That is not how it works, unfortunately. First of all, Databricks is an enormous platform. I would consider myself like pretty up there in terms of skilled users in the world, but I don't know everything about the platform. There are some features I'm like, I kind of know how it exists, but I don't really know I don't quite know the ins and outs of it. Particularly when it comes to a lot of like the security things. I'm not really a security person. Like, do I know that these things exist and roughly how they fit together? Yes. Am I an expert in everything? No. And I would argue that absolutely no one is an expert in every single area. And if you're waiting to be an expert before you apply for that job, before you put your hand up for that project, you are in for a bad time because one, it's completely unrealistic. And two, you're just going to feel terrible about yourself. It's like, oh, I don't know all these things. How am I ever going to know? Catastrophizing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's just completely unrealistic, and you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by not just kind of jumping into it and
jumping in,
learn on the job. Yeah,
exactly. Great advice. So roll your sleeves up, take on that project, and just kind of learn as you go. That's rather than trying to be the finished article before you even get started.
Absolutely. To be honest, I think this is just true of the tech industry and the way everything is going. There is a new framework that is coming out every week. There is a new open source library that someone's developing. We've not really mentioned Gen AI yet, and maybe we shouldn't mention it too much, but obviously like the pace of change for this has been fantastic. And people don't have the time to go back to university to do a master's and then come back and then be like, now I'm prepared for Gen AI. Like that's not how it works. You need to learn on the job. And for me personally, the best way to do that is to throw yourself into a project where you're kind of confident, but not really confident. Like aim for like 60% confident that you kind of know what you're doing. Yeah. Obviously, if you're like 10% confident, you're going to have a very steep learning curve, and some people respond to that. But if you're going into a project knowing that you can already do it, like, you're not going to learn a lot enough to constantly be developing those skills.
Sure. And on the skill set wise, what is there currently that you think, or what features of the platform do you see as becoming more popular, where engineers should start really looking into and making sure that they've got, a familiarity and understanding of those features?
Ooh, great one. So I think, goodness me, what a question. I don't think you realize that's a very,
how big
very
it is.
big question. So I think, maybe I'll address this in 2 months. So I think for me, the legacy users of people who've been using Databricks for kind of 4 or 5 years, because it started off as very much like a hardcore data engineering platform, things have been getting easier over time. Like, we know that back in the day, you needed a master's degree in Spark to understand everything. That's just not really sensible as a strategy or a direction to move. Things have been getting a lot easier, and we are getting a lot better at not just simplifying the platform, but also having to have less deep understanding of how every single piece of technology works to get good performance out of it. So I think DB SQL is a great example of this. Being able to use those warehouses or being able to use serverless, like, the performance is pretty good. And, I understand kind of where the insecurity comes from. If you're known as like the Spark expert and someone's like, hey, I've just made Spark optimization a heck of a lot easier. No, you don't need to do anything. For a lot of people, that's very deeply concerning, because it's like, oh, but I'm the Spark expert. No, you're telling me that I'm not needed. No, your job is to help people get value from data. It's not, it's not to be the person who knows like every single setting to pick. It's like the ability to provide people with the data that they need. Now, don't get me wrong, there are instances where you still need to do it, because especially in the kind of larger scale, or if you're doing something very, very specific to your industry, there are things that are needed. But there are a lot of things that straight out the box will give you good performance. And if you, to be honest, I've never found a developer who's like sat not doing much. They always have too much to do. Like, there's a lot that you can, give to other people now. So I'd say if you're kind of an OG user, that's probably my advice to you on how the platform has changed. However, if you've never used Databricks before and you've always been terrified because it's like, wow, that's the scary platform. That's the one that, all the smart data engineers have been using, and it's always, I watch tutorials and it's terrifying. There are a lot of things that are coming out which are what, the personas are towards, not just entry-level data engineers, but also analysts and BI engineers and BI developers. And even with things like Genie spaces, you don't need a huge amount of kind of coding expertise to be able to get started with it. But maybe you are wanting to kind of go from not much about Databricks and you want to kind of get to that kind of like middling data engineering tier. I think just working from first principles around what is a lake house, what is medallion architecture, how do you use Spark well, make sure that you're using Delta. I think a lot of these things you can pick up in a day. I think there's a lot of tutorials out there about kind of like what to use in Databricks, but where I've been on projects and I've seen things go horribly wrong is because they've tried to, or they've just kind of completely ignored the features that ship with Databricks, and they're like, I'm going to do it my own way, or they don't know that these things are available to them, and lo and behold, it doesn't work very well. So you've got to kind of rework a lot of things there. So that was my very long-winded answer to your question about what do people need to know on the platform.
There's a lot to learn, but the Genie thing, I was out with one of the Databricks account executives on Friday. He's local to me, actually. We live just south of Manchester, and he's very close to me. So we went and grabbed a beer, and he was showing me Genie on his laptop and how simple a tool it is, and how non-technical people can, it's just, you just basically write in, text, aren't you, to then get your visualizations, and your he was doing some analysis around insurance quotes and how, where insurance companies are paying out the biggest sums of money. And yeah, he was just like free texting, and he was getting all this data back, and it was all presented in lovely visuals. Very, very cool.
Yeah, it is. It is a really good feature. It's super. So I personally, in terms of where I found it useful. So at Databricks, and I think generally any kind of like data place, you have people who are kind of hands-on, and for a lot of places, if you want to progress, you have to stop programming and you have to be a manager and then a director or a head of or whatever. And like those people aren't programming every day, but they did start their career kind of understanding like the programming side of it, and maybe they didn't love it, but they just like the idea of like giving them a data set and being like, okay, then off you pop, time to remember some SQL. It's like, you know, you've not flexed that muscle in years. That's a massive uphill battle. But what is a lot easier to do is be like, okay, boss, I've set up this data set for you. Stop asking me questions, ask your own questions.
Yeah.
I know you can just ask questions about it, and they are data literate enough that like if something looks hideously wrong, they can spot that it's not quite right. They can have a look at the SQL and be like, I think that's a little bit wrong. But it means that they don't have to start from scratch each time and be like, oh, I cannot remember the syntax, this funny like anti-join, and like, how does that work? Is that the join that I need? Like, they don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just literally asking the questions and like, oh, the answers look sensible. So I have seen this be really popular amongst like the management squad at Databricks, because someone just set up that data set for them, or a few data sets. You know, someone's put some prompts in there with what do these column names mean? What is the point of all these data sets? This is how they join together. And then they can just like literally just plain English ask questions. And I think for a lot of like the internal mechanics of how things work, like that's what they like using.
It's kind of taking self-serve to just another level, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. As someone who has made a lot of dashboards previously that then get used about 5 times and no one ever looks at them ever again, I'm really hoping that this is going to be like the death of the single-use dashboard, and instead you can just be like, okay, you keep asking me for another dashboard, and it's the 3rd one now, and I'm not going to make you the dashboard, but I am going to give you the data set. You can go nuts asking questions as many as you like.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really like about Databricks, which you didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So back when I was in my pre-Databricks world and struggling with kind of old-fashioned tech, a lot of it would be license-based. And if you work in any kind of enterprise, trying to get hold of a license to do anything is a nightmare. It's, you know, trying to spend £100 is a lot harder than trying to spend £1 million. And so if you're like, oh, I need £100 for this license, oh, who's going to fund it? What project? You know, it'd be an absolute nightmare. But because Databricks is SaaS-based, you know, if you just need like to add someone so that they can ask questions, I don't know, and spend $10 a month on, you know, DBUs so that they can ask their questions and like leave you alone. That's really easy to do. And the same with dashboards and visualizations as well. You can add people as a viewer to this particular environment, and if they want to click around with things, they absolutely can do. Don't worry, we do have a few options that mean you don't have to give access to like an entire workspace. There are other things to do. But if someone like really wants to get in and like nitty gritty kind of start asking questions or like slicing their own things or like making their own dashboards, like they don't need to have a license. You can just add them and they're just paying for the compute in the same way that you would anyway. And, you know, if you're kind of like the data person, you can set up guide rails so that they're not going to like burn through huge amounts of money, because they're like, well, there's lots of data here, at least 10,000 rows. I need a giant cluster. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So yeah, I really love the way that it's going, the product, in terms of the direction and the kind of ease of use. For a long time, we've been saying that it is a steep learning curve, and I hope over time that learning curve gets softer and softer.
Sure. So it's much more consumption based as opposed to license focus in its pricing structure. And I guess you're only paying when the lights are switched on. You know, it's not a constant sort of charges there, usage charge.
It's a pure SaaS service, so there is no licensing whatsoever. If you are listening to this and you're like, but my company has a license, that's the way your IT team is set up, and they're doing internal charges. It's not a Databricks charge. Keep that one in mind.
Okay. Do you see that? Do you get a few people that kind of query that?
My old company, they had a real habit of doing it like that, because the way that, and some other companies do it like this as well. It's like, well, for example, let's say we pay $1 million a year for Databricks. That cost has got to come from somewhere. So we're just going to take $1 million, divide it by the users, and that's what the license fee is. And it's like,
okay. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's self-imposed. Maybe
I'd like to just.
sure.
Go on, Holly.
I was going to say one other thing about direction, the way that the platform has gone. I'm always consistently impressed by the rate of change that things have gone in. I know this is very infuriating for some people. It is normally the biggest gripe that I have, like whenever I go out to drinks with people who also use the platform. They're like, Holly, there's so much new stuff and we can't keep up and we have to change our projects all the time. I hear you. But the alternative is we don't release stuff and then it's not useful for you. One of the things that I've been consistently impressed with is, I'll see a trend going on of like about a thing and I'm like, man, we should start doing the thing. And then bang, like the email comes out. It's like, good news, we've acquired Tabular. Here's why we think this is an amazing thing to do for the company. And you're like, you are like 5 steps ahead of me, leadership team. I really appreciate this. Like they've super got their finger on the button. I don't think there's ever been a trend, or is trend the right word? I don't know, that we've missed out on because we've just not kept our finger on the pulse when it comes to what's going on, what the demand is, what people want from their like data platforms and all of that kind of stuff.
Brilliant. Do they have a sort of structure internally where they're collating feedback from, people like yourself out in the field? Is that kind of helping them stay ahead?
Oh, I think structure is a bit formal. It's like everything we live and breathe. Silly things like, when I go to events, like I always do a write-up of like, here are the things I did, here are the topics I'm hearing, here are the trends that are going on. We have like massive email lists internally where people can just talk about, trends that are going on, and then people jump in and be like, oh, I spoke to so-and-so, here's my experience. Or someone's like, I knew someone who worked for here and here's what they said about the thing. So like, it's not like some Google form that we fill in. It's like, someone today told me about iceberg. Like it's so much more. It's like ingrained, it's enmeshed with everything that we do. So it's, I'd like to be able to say there's like some kind of like single perfect process. No, it's just full on and at the front of your mind and your attention for everything that we do.
Yeah, I love that about Databricks. It's very communal, isn't it? There's a lot of thought leadership. There's a lot of people who enjoy doing these kind of conversations, vlogging, meetups, events. It seems to be ingrained in the culture of the people that work, within Databricks, which is great. I wanted to go back a couple of steps to professional services.
Oh yeah, go on.
Not prying too much, but just to give people a little sneak peek into kind of what goes on in professional services. Can you give us an overview of some of the interesting projects that you've been involved in, and what kind of projects that professional services will be deployed onto?
I wish there was some kind of trend that I could tell you about, but it is everything. It is all over the place. Now, I focused a lot on data engineering, so that's where most of my stories come in. We have a machine learning team. They do like the classic data science and also the Gen AI stuff. But I'll just list off some projects that we have. So some have been really fast adopters of Gen AI, and they're like, we've seen the thing publicly, but we want to make it work internally. We've not quite made it work at scale. How can you help us? And you also go through like the nitty gritty. I don't know if anyone's ever spoken to you about like ML ops or like doing like Gen AI ops. Like it is a headache. And if you've never done it before, it is not fun because like you fail all the time. It's like ugly failures. Lots of data sciencey stuff. I've worked on projects where, data quality projects. I worked on like a real-time streaming project. That was really fun. I worked on some like truly mind-boggling scale. There is a blog out there that I've written. If you're super curious, you can find it out there about kind of like ways to optimize things. But for context, this was an enormous titan of the tech industry. And they were like, yeah, so we've taken all of our Google click data from our website from the last 5 years, and we have it in one table. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is the biggest table I think I've ever seen. And I'm like, anyway, so we've got some performance issues. What do we do next? And you're like, I've never seen anything this scale. So, really pushing the boundaries in terms of like what's capable. Something fun about working with Databricks is if you're doing something really unique and really interesting, people from engineering start going, oh, that's really interesting. Well, can we have a chat about like what you're doing? And that's like the ultimate cool stamp. If like someone from engineering starts reaching out to you, it's like, yes, I am doing proper work here.
Oh, very good. And in terms of the sort of direction and kind of where you see the company going and the kind of projects and use cases Databricks will be working on, what are you most excited about? Where do you see the next sort of 12 months?
Next 12 months. So it's that simplification piece for me. I'm really looking forward to, there are some things coming out which I'm looking forward to. I'm not sure if I can talk about them yet. Actually, one of these was mentioned at Data and AI Summit, so I'm happy talking about it. There was a 100% serverless offering that Ollie did mention on stage that I'm really looking forward to. For those of you who've had to like set up Databricks from scratch before, it is painful. It does make things like demos and training, and like people like you who are listening who might be like, oh, I want to do like a little side project to, learn more about Databricks so I can put it on my CV. Like getting anything set up outside of an enterprise situation is really difficult and kind of impractical, to be honest. And so in future, we want to be able to make that a lot easier for people. What else on the simplification journey? Genie Spaces is probably going to get a lot more better. I don't know specific details. I know that they've got like a really good team on it, so I don't know the specifics, but I trust them. They're going to do some great work. And what else am I looking forward to? Goodness me. Oh, I'm looking forward to a lot of the lake flow infrastructure. Sorry, I can see your expression. This looks very boring, nerdy, like data engineering stuff.
No, I just hadn't heard it. I heard of a lot of what you've talked about. Granted, I'm not technical, but I haven't heard of the lake flow infrastructure terminology used before. So
yeah, so this is about, there's 3 components to it. Like the big exciting one for me is the way that you can bring data into Databricks. Currently, we have like a lot of classic data to Databricks connectors. They're fine, they're great, but in this world of Gen AI, you want to get data from your Google Drive or from SharePoint or from, the back of Salesforce or some other things as well. And like less kind of data ecosystem things. And that's really going to be able to, supercharge what people are able to do with their data because they get it from like all of these operational systems rather than just getting it from like other data stuff where they did the heavy lifting elsewhere. So I think that's an exciting one for me, where again, you can focus more on getting the data and doing interesting things with it rather than having to spend 3-4 months figuring out how to connect these flipping systems together.
That sounds like it's going to make engineers' jobs a lot straightforward, a lot easier.
Yes, a lot less stressful, hopefully.
A lot less stressful. Yeah. And how do you see Databricks maintaining its kind of competitive edge over, the next 12 months?
I think the competitive edge comes from the pace of change that we are able to work at. I think, when you're a small startup, it's quite easy to be quite nippy and quite zooty in terms of how quick you can move and adapt to trends. The size we're at now, I've not seen that slow down. If anything, my experience is that it's sped up. So this ability to constantly deliver, constantly adapt to what it is that people need their technology stack to do, for me, that's one of the things, the key reasons why Databricks stays competitive, has been competitive 5 years ago, still is competitive today, and my estimate still will be competitive in 5 years' time.
Brilliant. And what about for yourself, Holly? How do where do you kind of see your next evolution within the company?
So I have just started a new role in developer relations. It's a bit of a funny job. It's to everyone who's listening. I probably sound like I just like talk about Databricks all day, which is true. I do, and I write blogs and I do videos and things like that. I see myself very much as an educator. I think as someone who has gone through the hard graft of learning things and finding it very difficult, frankly. I would like to make that journey a lot easier for other people. But for my co-workers, they see the slightly less polished side of me, and they see all of the feedback that I get from people on what they like and what they don't like. I get involved with reviewing features before they're released, and what people are going to respond well to and what they're not going to respond well to. And based on all of the work that I've done over the years, you have that kind of intuition of like, well, if you do it like this, you're going to really upset a load of admins, so I really wouldn't recommend doing the thing like this. And again, through a lot of my teaching as well, I see what things trip people up. Name collisions is a great example, or just wording and like documentation. So making things a lot easier from the inside, and like how we work, how we make Databricks be easier for people to use. And it takes someone, again, engineers, they're all really smart. Again, product, they're all really smart. Arguably, they're too smart for their own good, and they need someone like me to be like, this doesn't make any sense, and I've been using the platform for 5 years. Please reword. So it's a bit of a two-sided role.
Nice. Is that a new role within the company, or is that kind of something that you've shaped for yourself in some ways?
So developer relations has been something that has been very key at Databricks for a long time. However, the original kind of developer relations people were the founders. And so they are great at this. Don't get me wrong. They still use the platform all the time. I really love the work that they do. And, occasionally you bump into like their projects that they're doing with Databricks. So they are still doing that, but obviously they have other things to do now that the company is enormous. We have had a DevRel team ever since the beginning. However, we've finally got someone in to lead the team and kind of set up a bit more structure, someone who is very tenured in kind of developer relations. It is a funny job. I think a lot of people mistake it for marketing, but we're not driven by clicks and views and metrics and things like that. It's very much around community and literally developers and developer experience. And that can be a bit of a weird team to be in terms of, what it is that we're trying to do, and then not getting lumped in with, marketing, or, we have like kind of exec management teams in the field as well. So the kind of sales side of it, it's like, well, if you're not marketing and you're not sales, you're not engineering, what do you do? And it's a very, it's a very hard kind of line to walk. So now that we've got someone who is kind of leading this team, it is becoming a bit more structured. We've also acquired a few people as well through all of our acquisitions that we've done. We also have a few people that we've brought in. So yeah, we've always had it as a team, but it's getting a bit more structure to it now.
Very good. And then I have three more questions. Where can listeners find you, Holly? Obviously, you say you've got some great content out there. Where should we point them to?
Sure. If you search for Holly Smith Data, I think my LinkedIn profile is the first thing that comes up. That's probably the best way to follow me. I do have a link tree, which I will send a link to you. If you put it in the show notes, you can get access to things like my YouTube playlist where I've got all my details. I also post blogs on community as well. I haven't quite figured out a way to get a playlist, but if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll get all the announcements as soon as things are released.
Brilliant. And if you could do it all again, would you still bet your career on Databricks?
Oh yes, absolutely. If I had to do it again, I don't think I'd do anything different.
Excellent.
I'm very happy with the way.
Very happy.
Yep.
Well, I guess that's testament to the fact you've nearly been there for 6 years. And, in our industry, the average tenure, I think, is around 2 years. So, you've tripled that already. And one question for our next guest. Obviously, we're very Databricks focused on the podcast. So do you have a question that I can, and I don't know who the next guest is just yet, but what one question that I could ask the next guest?
Oh, what one question could you ask the next? Do you want a nice question or a not so nice question?
How are you feeling?
Not nice. Oh, goodness me. Let's think of a question. No, I can't think of anything. Maybe.
I didn't prep you for this, did I?
No, you didn't. Tell me
I put you on the spot.
Are you going to get someone technical or are you going to get someone salesy?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay,
maybe I should have told you who it is first, and then you could have, tailored the question.
Oh, I have a spicy question.
Okay.
What is the personality trait that you least like to work with when it comes to technical projects?
It's a good question. It's gonna cause a debate.
I think it's useful in that everyone talks about like how to be a good data engineer, or like how to work on a data team, but no one ever gives you a list of things of like, don't do these things. Like there's a big list of like, don't do these things, and we never talk about it. Probably because that's
a very good point.
It might upset people, but like there's a big list of don't do's.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't go on a job spec, does it? It's like essential skills not to have.
Yeah, anti-skills, yes.
Anti-skills. Oh, brilliant, Holly. No, but thank you so much. It's been a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. We've gone wildly over time. So either this is going to be your longest episode ever, or it turns out your editor is fantastic. So thank you so much for having me on here. And if anyone wants to get in touch, you can find me on LinkedIn. Email me, holly@databricks.com.
Thanks, Holly.